Hoops through life. Hoops through life.
Welcome to another episode of Hoops Through Life, a podcast where we discuss the women's basketball collegiate recruiting process and transition from high school to college. I'm your host, Elsbeth Bierman. Our guest today is Coach Lindsey Burke. Lindsey played for 4 years at Mercyhurst University. She started her coaching career in 2013 as an assistant at the University of Mary Washington. In 2016, she was the director of basketball operations at Bucknell University. Then in 2017, Lindsey was an assistant at the University of Rochester. In 2020, she found her current home as the head coach at Randolph Macon College. And this past year, she was named the Old Dominion Athletic Conference Coach of the Year for the first, but I'm sure not the last, time in her coaching career. Lindsey, thank you so much for being here.
Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's just get into it. When you see a student athlete, for the first time, what's the first thing you notice? What kind of draws you in?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about maybe what we need even in that recruiting class is what catches my eye. If I know we're going to have a big group of post players, graduating that year, whatever the case may be, a lot of times, and if I see somebody 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, like that might catch my eye right away. But I am a big believer in defense. So usually somebody's defense honestly catches my eye, sometimes even more than their offense. I live firmly that you are who you can guard. And so I think about that a lot when I'm out recruiting. So a lot of times it's just that intensity on defense because I know that's not something you can teach. I can teach finishes. I can teach, I can help with shots. I can do all that kind of stuff, but that's just kind of a innate ability, to be a tenacious defender. I know I can't teach that. I can enhance that, but I can't teach it. And so I think that probably catches my eye first above anything else.
And so if you were to say like you had some non-negotiables as a coach, it sounds like defense would be that thing. Like if they can't defend, they're like kind of off your list, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think all within reason, right? I try to remember too that I am catching, and like so if I'm out at a tournament, I am catching a like microcosm of their whole basketball career, right? And everything else. So if they get blown by on defense, I don't like immediately cross them out and say absolutely no way. I give them some grace, right? I would say just like a non-negotiable though is like their bounce back, right? If they're hanging their heads after getting blown by on defense, and then they're just like completely deflated down on the offensive end, again, that's something that I can enhance, but I can't teach that kind of like innate ability to get it back, on offense and to have that belief in themselves that they got it.
Yeah, that's a hard one too, because I know because that's the balance, right? Like I've talked to a bunch of coaches and they say it's a balance between like giving grace and understanding that something might be going on and you're seeing a snapshot, like you said, like a snapshot in time. And that's why one of the coaches I talked to, they're like, they just want to see as much film as possible because then it's more like a
Yep.
pattern of behavior as opposed to like a snapshot in time, like you said. But yeah, so if you think about like the calendar year, or let's talk about this moment right now. Like, where are you putting the bulk in it? We're recording on middle of April. Where are you putting the bulk of your recruiting energy?
Like class wise.
Or just like where you are right now. Yeah, we can talk about class. We can talk about like what you're doing today, for example.
Yeah. Well, today I'm making my schedule for the Apache event this weekend and then driving a majority of the way tonight. But yeah, I think we are like, as far as our recruiting calendar goes, we pretty much just wrapped up the class of 2024. And it's a little bit of everything, honestly. I had a couple of recruits that went in early decision. So they were signed, sealed, and delivered before November 1st. And I've had one what is today, Thursday? I had one on Tuesday that called me to commit. So it's a little bit of everything, I think, at Randolph Macon. I would say it's a little bit of like 50-50. Almost each class has committed probably in the front end. I think in basketball, it's honestly a hot time is either before their senior season or after. I have a ton of recruits that tell me like, I want to make a decision before my senior season starts because I want to know where I'm going and I want to just play free. that was probably like half of our class decided to do that. And I think the other half was just unsure, right, of what they wanted to do. And like while they're in season, they just don't have as much time to explore other schools, go stay overnight. So a lot of times, like they'll wait until their senior season wraps up, and then really make decisions in March and April. Going off of the grace theme, I try to give them some grace. I was a person in high school that did not decide until late April, so I can empathize with them on that. But like I said, we've just wrapped up 2024, and right now, like we're in the thick of things with 2025. This is really a time that, like, again, I got to see them play probably briefly last summer. I've stayed in contact with them throughout, this school year, but now I'm really getting to see them play live again. And as they're another year older, they've matured more. And especially like right now, I'm really starting to envision them as a potential, Yellow Jacket basketball player, because they're getting much closer to that window. A lot of unofficial visits right now. So a lot of times they usually get their feet on campus first, in the springtime here. I'll see them play again, throughout the summer, and then official visits, like their overnight visits, usually happen in the fall. Try to do them around football weekends and stuff like that. So a lot in September and October.
Yeah. So then if you think about the 2024 class, when did those relationships start for you all?
Yeah, I would say it's a solid 12 to 18 month process with all of them. And even some of them like came to our elite camp as a ninth grader, rising 10th grader, right? So like that process started then. For others, it started a lot later, like one that ended up committing. I saw her play last summer, like in July. She came to our elite camp in August, and that was really the first time I had her on campus, the first time I was really starting to build that connection with her. And then she committed in February. So that was like a 6-month kind of time frame. So I do think it varies. But I do think the deeper the connection in the relationship, I get to learn so much more about them. And I ultimately just want them to be happy. I think it is such a small time window in their lives that they get to play college basketball that Randolph Macon's a small school, right? We're just about 1,500 undergraduate students. I'm not going to convince somebody if they tell me pretty early on in the process that like I'm really dead set on going to a medium-sized school that has 5,000 to 8,000 people. That's not what we have. I tell them all the time that nobody on our roster picked Randolph Macon because it was big. They all picked it because it was small, right? Like that is what they wanted. They wanted to have the small size classrooms. But I can't learn that until we go through the process a little bit too. So I do think that those relationships really help. And it helps me to figure out kind of what they want out of this experience. I tell recruits and their parents all the time that a lot of times this is their first time through the process, right? As a student athlete, as a parent. I just finished year 11 in college coaching. So I say, I actually go through this process every year, right? With admissions and everything else. So I try to just be as helpful as I possibly can to them.
Yeah, for sure. And so like, how would you say 11 years in, I'm sure it's like changed so much. Like, how would you say things have evolved, or like what extra supports are you seeing are needed for students as they're going through the process?
Yeah. And everywhere is different than I've been, right? Like Mary Washington was a public school. Then, I went Division I for a year. That recruiting landscape was completely different. And even in the Patriot Leagues, you're talking about high academic Division I. Then I went to Rochester, which is like that medium-sized school and high academic. So everything has been so different. I would say that now the dial, like the intensity dial has just been turned up. Like I felt like, 11 years ago that student athletes were making decisions, without as much I don't want to say investment, that's not the right word, but like they'd go on a couple day visits, and then they'd decide kind of from there. Now from like start to finish, they're probably on our campus 4 times between like their unofficial visit, coming to elite camp, coming to overnight, coming back to a game, doing all that kind of stuff. Like there's just so much more. Like that intensity dial has just been turned up, I think, in that process. And the other thing that has done that too is social media, right? Like there's just so much pressure on them as student athletes. Like they take this visit, then they get an offer from so-and-so, and then like all of a sudden it's out on the internet somewhere. And it's their choice whether they want to put it out there or not. But that turns up the intensity dial for them. And so I think just like showing all that love and feeling love, It's just so much more now than it's ever been.
hmm And yeah, I mean, that could be a product of so many things, right? Like it could be a product of exposure of social media, of just maybe needing to do a little bit more due diligence or like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's very interesting to point out of just like how much more is needed, maybe in the build up to coming on campus, which I'm sure is good for coaches too, because then they get to know you and your family and whoever else might be supporting you. So yeah, that's super interesting. But you mentioned social media. How do you all utilize social media throughout the recruiting process?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is one, right, getting to know them a little bit. I think two, it's really helpful with just like general updates kind of on like what they have going on, right? Like they're only one person. Like I can use an example of like especially like throughout their high school seasons to know they scored 1,000 points, right? Like I can see that on their Twitter. I can text them really quickly and say like congrats on 1,000 points. Like I didn't have a paper chain in my office of like they're at 998 and 999. Like I have no idea, right? Like I'm doing my own team like during that time. So like to know those little updates about like what they have going on is just really helpful for me. It makes me feel like I can stay connected to them. But I also think it's good for them to see like what we have going on. Because especially at the Division 3 level, it is about so much more than just basketball. And I think for them, it's great for them to be able to see themselves in some of our players and like what they have going on, right? Like if they're interested in going the pre-med route and one of our juniors is doing an internship at Bon Secours and they're like, wow, that could be me someday. So I think it does. I think social media, it's a big lens, don't get me wrong. And I think sometimes it's too much, but I do think it gives, if it's used in the right way, I think it can give me a window into their lives and them a window into kind of what it would be like to be a women's basketball player here.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of hilarious if you had all your recruits like their point totals is like very beautiful mind-esque of like
There's no way.
okay, so but let's say a student athlete, because the question that I get from parents a lot is like it's so overwhelming. Like social media is
Yep.
super overwhelming. And it's like, do we need to have it? Do we not need to have it? And some kids don't even like social media like that. So like, would you say it's like a nice addition or it's kind of a must-have?
I do think it's a nice addition. I don't think it's a must-have. I mean, again, and sometimes it's good for me to know this kind of information. Like, so say I see Catherine Kagi on court one, and I look up her, her Twitter, and she has two Division 1 offers like right now in the spring, right, of her junior year. That's
hmm
probably not gonna, she's probably not gonna choose Randolph Macon maybe over those two Division 1 offers, right? So like for me, sometimes it's really good information to have. I don't think it's a must have, but I do think it enhances, right? Because for me, again, so if Catherine Kagi is playing on Yellow Jackets Elite, okay, so then there's Yellow Jackets Elite, there's Yellow Jackets Elite Gold, there's Yellow Jacket Elite Blue, like there's all these different teams. And so like sometimes if I can go to that kid's Twitter and I can read that she's on Yellow Jacket Elite Blue, perfect. Like then I know exactly which one I am looking for because even just like I said today, like I'm making my Apache schedule. There's no rosters, right? It's just the
hmm
team names when I'm going to these events until I have their rosters, unless the kid has sent me their schedule already. But even sometimes, like they don't include their jersey number. So, like if I go to their Twitter and it says Yellow Jacket Elite Blue, number 13, and then I know exactly who she is because even like this past weekend, I was looking for somebody in the book, couldn't find them, and like they're under the wrong number.
Yeah.
So it would have been so helpful, like to have that kind of backup that I could have double checked. Because like I always am looking on Twitter when I'm at an event trying to find somebody, like if they're not in the book, making sure they're on the right team, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's like if there was something that I could like snap my fingers and change, it would be just like that information gap. Like if a kid is interested in a college, all you have to do is go to the athletics website, coach's name's there, email's there, sometimes the phone number's there, boom, all that information is right there. If you try to find, and I understand like privacy and they're minors, but like if you try to find somebody on a high school website, sometimes you're just like so out of luck or just,
You're
and so
digging.
yeah, I think that's why I think social media is a good thing because it's like if you can put out on your profile, like maybe pin some highlights, put out your high school team name, number, and maybe just an email. Like you don't have to put your phone number, just an email. it would
Yep,
just be so much easier for coaches to find you and then contact you, which is like
for sure.
sometimes time that's like so wasted in your
Mm-hmm.
day, I'm sure, as you just mentioned. So yeah, so this is kind of a left turn, but like if you think about your roster this past year, or even including your incoming kids, what percentage of those student athletes would you say reached out, like made initial contact with you first versus you reaching out to them first?
Hmm. I was a communications major, so first of all, numbers are not my strong suit.
Okay.
I didn't do much math. Um, I would say the number of like reaching out becomes less and less. Probably of our current roster, and I may be like an anomaly because like my entire junior class, I recruited all off of film because it was during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first year taking over here at Macon. So I was doing a lot of reaching out then,
Mm-hmm.
because I was brand new and recruiting everyone off of film. I would probably say maybe 60-40, like 40% reached out to me with interest,
Okay.
60%. I definitely saw them first.
Yeah, that's a good, I think that's like a decent split. And yes, I remember your first year because every kid that would come visit Shenandoah, we'd be like, "Oh, where are you visiting?" Every kid, Randolph Macon, Randolph Macon, Randolph Macon. We were just like, "What is happening at Randolph Macon?" She's
I was
reaching
grinding.
out. So yeah, it was just kind of funny for us in the office to talk about. But all right, so when you're talking to a kid for the first time, let's say it's a phone call, what what are kind of those things that you're looking for like in that conversation?
I mean, first of all, I ask them all the time, like about their background and tell me about your family. That's good information for me to have to know, like, are they a first gen college student? Like, do they know anything about this process? Do they have siblings that have gone through this process? Do they have siblings that are athletes that have gone through this process? Because if that's the case, then they're going to have a decent, like, institutional knowledge of like how this is going to go. But I also ask them, and I'll say this, I think, because that is really what you do, right? Is help right on the other side of this. I can't tell you the amount of recruits I have on the phone, and I tell them that, especially like in the spring of their junior year, to get in the driver's seat. Like there is so much
Mhm.
information out there. Like start to decide and just be confident about like what kind of school setting that you want. Do you want urban, suburban, rural? Like what do you want, right? Do you want like what is the distance from home like, because I do think that like and you used the word overwhelming a couple minutes ago. I think it gets super overwhelming for them, right? Like if they are not willing to go to the West Coast but Pomona Pizza reaches out to them, don't waste the Pomona Pizza's coach's time, right?
Yeah.
Like on the phone with her to just then say like I don't want to, even for us, like Charlotte's about 5 hours away. Sometimes they want to stay within a 3 hour bubble, then like don't go further than like whatever that circle may be, like whatever that comfort level is. Really think about like your parents coming to the games, right? Like is that something that is important to you or is it not? And so I just really try to start talking to them about those things, and I think sometimes they're things that maybe they're not hammering out because in the spring of their junior year, they are still riding in the back seat. Like they are waiting for the coaches to reach out to
Mhm.
them about their schools. Whereas I can't tell you the amount of recruits that I have at the end of the summer that are just lost because they waited for coaches to reach out to them based on tournaments, and things like that. And maybe they didn't. And I think I have a unique perspective because when I was in high school, AAU was a lot less, don't get me wrong. But I tore my ACL in May of my junior year going into my senior year. So I never played AAU.
Mm.
And like I try to tell them, like, worst case scenario, like you don't play in any AAU tournaments this summer. Like, how does this process look now? And if they don't start to think about what is actually important to them, they're just always playing catch up. So I try to get some things out in that first conversation, right? And especially for us, we're a small size school, right? I don't hide that. I don't hide like our location either, right? Like if they're in Charlotte and we're outside of Richmond and they want to stay within 3 hours, like it's probably not going to work. But I also try to get them to talk some of those things out because sometimes they say like like oh like I'm really open to going anywhere and it's really important for my parents to like come to the games. Okay, I'm like, so that might mean like a radius or something like
Mhm.
that, but they doing their homework on the front end, for as much time as they spend in the car and going to AIU tournaments and everything else, and probably scrolling and on TikTok, like everybody has a phone. Like they can really start to, in my opinion, investigate some of those somewhat non-negotiables of like what they're going to be serious about, and start to find that before going to the AIU tournaments. Because if then a coach reaches out and it matches up, that is great. But again, worst case scenario, you get hurt at the beginning of this AIU season, and then now going into the fall, like what does that look like?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I think I was actually thinking about this, I think like yesterday or something, and um and I think, and give me your opinion on this. Like for me, basketball is like the last part of that Venn diagram, right? It's like
mhm.
all of these factors, maybe like distance, like you said, what you're thinking about studying, which most likely will change, but all of
Mhm.
those things. And then it's like, okay, now where can I do that? What school can I do that at, instead of like trying to find these schools and then like from there, like figuring out how you can kind of manipulate to get what else you want out of life after you're playing. Like you said, it's such a short
Right.
period of time in their life. So yeah, what are your
It's
thoughts on
like
that?
the pyramid's inverted, right?
Right.
Like it should be the other way, because if you think about it, like the pyramid's inverted, and the smallest factor is the coaches reaching out to you in some ways, right? Like
Hmm.
you absolutely cannot control that part of it, right? Like I'm supposed to be going to Apache this weekend, I get the flu, I don't end up going, right? Or like something like that. Like
Hmm.
there's so many uncontrollables in that way too. Whereas if the pyramid was the way that I think is the most beneficial to the student athlete, like then the bottom, which is in my opinion like the information collecting, that's the biggest part of the process, right? It's not the smallest part that you can't control, which is the college coaches getting eyes on you or reaching out to you or whatever that is, right? The other thing is college coaches leave,
Hmm.
and so like somebody may get eyes on you at XYZ school, and then a month later they're gone. So like maybe you were interested in that school, or that's a school you would be interested in, but you would never know because that coach didn't reach out to you because they left.
Yeah.
So I do think if the pyramid is the shape that it was intended to be, and that bottom base, right, is the information collecting, somewhat of like the, I call it like the pre-decision making, right? Like obviously the decision is where you want to go, but the pre-decision is the factors, right? The distance, the majors, and all of that kind of stuff. And even, I mean, there's a lot of recruits that I talk to, and I call it being decided on being undecided. Like that's okay too. Don't go 30 credits deep into something that you're gonna end up not liking, right? Um, I think like find a school like Randolph Macon, right? You don't have to declare your major until after your sophomore year. Okay. That's something, maybe if you're decided on being undecided, like that's something that you look for, that like somewhere I don't have to, declare a major right away. But that's going to take some work, right? It's going to take getting in the driver's seat, figuring out what you want, right? And then like the next level in that pyramid is going to the tournaments and getting in front of coaches and stuff like that. But you're going there with a base. So then you're not wasting your time or the coach's time if NYU reaches out to you, but you don't want to go to school in a city. Well, that's in the one of the biggest cities in the world, right? So that you're not even entertaining that idea, because you're sound in what's important to you.
Yeah, definitely. Triangles, Venn diagrams. Hopefully that
All the shapes.
translated. Yeah.
Hmm.
So then if let's say a kid is like not interested in you or some other school, like what is the best way for them to give that information to the coaches?
Yeah, I am totally fine with a text. I think I respect a phone call once they've come for an overnight visit, right? And like we've really built that relationship and they're deciding to go somewhere else. I do think a phone call is appropriate then. But even like at that initial, like I've had a lot of recruits that get back to me and say, "Hey coach, thanks for like watching me play, but I'm not interested in playing in college." Best of luck, right? Like I appreciate that, because they're not even, right. They've made a decision that
Hmm.
like they're not going to play in college. I'm not going to keep watching them play, right? And I'll move on. So I do think a text is appropriate, to say kind of thanks for the interest, but I'm focused on other schools or whatever it is.
Yeah, so ghosting was not one of those options. Just wanted
It was not. It
to
was not.
Yes. All right. So if, and you kind of talked about this, so if this is like a repeat, please, we can just move on. But just like thinking about like how far in advance, and you said 12 to 18 months, so this might be a moot point, but like you just finished 2024, you're looking at 2025s this summer. What does the class of 26 look like for you all? And even beyond if you're looking further than that.
Yeah, I think the bulk of the 2025 is like right now, and especially with the way the NCAA calendar is now, with like open weekends in April and May, and now June. I'm getting married in June, so that one's going to be a little tough. What you
Well,
said, your birthday's June?
congratulations.
Thank you. Your birthday's June 23rd, you said.
Correct, yeah.
I'm getting married on the 22nd, so we'll be
Okay.
awfully close. But I do think that it used to be like July used to be so heavy in this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
Where now like I feel like I can really get good eyes like on 2025s in April and May and then June a little bit. That once I get to July, I feel like I have a little bit more, I'll call it time, like in my schedule, like in my recruiting schedule when I'm at an event, right? Because like the other 2025s, like I've seen them play. I've been able to get an evaluation on them. So like by July, I'm probably just seeing those ones that I really liked again. If not adding a couple more names to the list, but the list is usually pretty solid by then. And then I feel like I have a little bit more flexibility to start getting eyes on 26s, 27s, and then building that list from there. And then I really try to get them to come like to our elite camp at the end of the summer. I run our elite camp. They don't play the whole time at our elite camp. I low key run it like practice because I want them to really get a sense of what it would be like to be a basketball player there. I've been to elite camps before that it's just 5-on-5 for a whole day. I've seen that before, right? And again, like even it'd be 5-on-5 with a group of people you literally just met. I want to see sometimes those skills, or like I want to see like some of our toughness drills. Like I want to see how they're going to compete in those kind of drills as opposed to just playing 5-on-5 full court.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I have like a couple questions in my head, so I want to make sure it's most pertinent. So, or what do you think about, do you attend like those showcase tournaments where people come and then they play 5-on-5 for like 2 hours and like they don't know their teammates?
Um, Not really. I think first of all, like I said, the intensity dial on everything recruiting and AAU related has just been turned up.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many AAU tournaments now that I guess I don't feel like those ones are more beneficial than the others. I'll attend like an occasional, like some of like the Northern Virginia type showcases like that they have usually in the fall. But even sometimes then it's like a mix of them with their high school teams. So I do think that is a little bit more beneficial. I would say probably what I do the most though that speaks to that is I'll go to other schools' elite camps. So like I've gone to Radford's before, VCU's, Richmond's, because and a lot of times that's geographically right. There's probably like a decent amount of kids from North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, maybe even South Carolina, Kentucky that might be going to those. So it's a good way for me to get eyes on them. And they are playing like in that kind of setting, like you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point too. I didn't necessarily think about that, but it's like a big draw, like because I'm from the Maryland area, and if you go to like the
Mm-hmm.
Maryland camp or elite camp or whatever, you're gonna get like eyes on probably like thousands of kids. Like there's so many kids that go to that
Yes, for
camp.
sure. Yep.
Um, and they're not all going to the University of Maryland.
They are
So
not.
yeah. So and so during your season, the college season, where do you put your focus on like your recruiting?
Yeah, it honestly has to be, in my opinion, on like that senior class that's going to be potentially coming in that next year. I try to even get to every one of my committed players at least one of their one of their high school games
Yeah.
per season. And like while we are playing a season, it definitely is tough. So a lot of times, like during our finals week during December, I'll spend a lot of time traveling and trying to get out on the road to see them play as much as possible. Sometimes it doesn't work out perfectly, but just from a time perspective, it's just not as easy, in my opinion, to get out to see like the juniors. I think it's kind of special for me to get out to one of our committed players' games. So I don't want to lose sight of that because it is true. Like even when they do commit, you are still recruiting them. I don't want them to just see me and then not see me until a whole year later when they come to school. So I think, like I said, a bulk of it is probably spent on the current senior class.
Okay. Yeah, senior, it's nice to go to like senior nights. Like that's pretty special to go
Yep.
to, especially with kids who've committed.
Mhm.
So it sounds like you all do your official visits like in the fall. You mentioned like around a football game. So what are those like? What does an official visit mean to you? Like, are you at that point like maybe they just need to check off one more box, or like what does that process mean for you, and what are you looking for when a student comes for an official visit?
Yeah, I think it's as much for them, obviously, as it is for me too. I've said no to some people after an official visit. I've had recruits before that have come on campus and they spent the whole weekend on their phone watching a movie with their own AirPods in and just like not engaging, right? Like with our team. Um, that's just that's not our culture here, right? And I don't think that is what's going to fit really well with us. But I do think it is a lot for the student athlete that it's a test drive, right? Before buying the car. It's the closest form to like, what is this going to look like if I decided to commit to come here? So a lot of them are in the fall. We even have done them before that I usually send like the recruits the dates that are going to work. Usually it's like 3 weekends. So a lot of times like we'll have between 4 and 6 recruits that are here staying overnight together. I have found it to be really beneficial, one, so that they don't show up as like the only person that's in high school, right? Because they play pickup a lot of times, like on that Friday afternoon with our current team. And when you're the only person in high school, you feel a little bit like out of place. Whereas you're having that shared experience with some other people. The other thing is I expect our whole team to be there during the official visit weekends. And if I'm doing them sporadically, like throughout the fall, that's a lot to ask of our players, especially basketball is the longest season known to mankind. So they're here, right? Like the whole
Yeah.
basketball season. And then so like now in the fall, I'm asking them to be here all these other times too to like help with the official visits. Like they need to have a life, right? They need to be able to go to the wedding at home. They need to be able to do this thing for the club that they're involved in. So I usually tell our players those dates like over the summer. So then I'm like, these are the dates we're doing the official visits. The expectation is that you're here. If you're not going to be here or can't host, like you need to tell me now. So I do think for the recruits, it's really nice that they meet the whole team, right? It's not that they're just hanging out with the freshmen or whatever it is. Like they do something as the whole team, usually on that Friday night. But I think it's a lot for the parents too, because they get that kind of sense of dropping them off and leaving them there for a little bit, that they get to start to feel that a little bit too. And like, is this a place that I feel like I can drop them off? And I'm always going to worry about them, right? Because they're parents, but that I feel safe, that I feel like they're going to be taken care of, that I feel like they're going to be happy. So I think it's really, it's for me, it's for them, it's for the parents, it's for everybody.
hmm And so, yeah, it sounds very important that the whole team is able to like spend time with these people and vet them in their own way. What does their feedback mean to you after the visit is done?
Yeah, it means a lot. I think at the end of the day, they're 18 to 22-year-olds. So, and I think we have a great group. So I think I obviously listen to them. I again, like 11 years I've been doing this. I rarely have gotten, I mean, like the example I gave you about the headphones in the video, like that's an anomaly. There's not been many of those cases. A lot of the times it really is, oh, like, she said that she would fit in, or we think she would fit in, and she said she really liked it here. Um, and so I do think they give some feedback, but I wouldn't say they're 18 to 22-year-olds at the end of the day. Usually when they drop them off on Saturday morning, they're like, yeah, she loved it. It was great. This, that, and the other thing. Okay, see ya. Because that's just how they operate. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess if they're at that point, like you've already done the pre-vetting of like talking to them on the phone, meeting with them, maybe at an unofficial visit and like spending the day with them. And so it's like if they're at that point, they've already passed some sort of litmus test for you and your staff. So yeah, I would say more often than not, it's just like, yeah, it was fine, whatever. See ya.
mhm. Yeah. And again, they're not that old. Like they've just gone through this process too. And I think I think, like for them too, it's important that like when recruits come on campus that it's okay if you're shy, right? Again, we have players on our team that are shy. Um, you want to be able to connect though in some kind of way, right, with the team. And so sometimes I think if recruits come on campus and just have no questions, no topics, and they're already pretty shy and quiet, like at their core. It's hard for our players to get a sense of like if they liked it here, if like it was a good experience for them. So I do think, like I said, doing your homework on the front end, and coming in with some of those ideas. Because a lot of times, like recruits are maybe taking 2 or 3 other official visits, right? That they're going to some other schools. So then at the end of the day, they can compare and contrast how they went.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, because like you said, I mean, the process is 6 to 18 months, maybe plus. And it's like your brain cannot remember. Like, I don't remember something from 18 months ago. Like, write it down and keep those notes. That way, when you're like looking at the end of the process, when you're making your decision, you can say, oh yeah, I did like that, or oh yeah, like that was weird, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was, and you can just kind of refresh your memory. So yeah, for sure, I think just taking the time to like take some notes will be super
Yep.
beneficial at the end of the process.
I tell them all the time to start a note in their phone. That it's like, I came to Randolph Macon on floor 1824, like, especially if it was that first visit, that they get to figure, like, because again, it's gonna be a blur when they look at it in the rearview mirror, so that they can start to organize, right? Organize their thoughts about like where they've gone, what they liked, what they didn't like.
Yeah, for sure. So the transition from high school to college, it's a big one in a lot of different ways. And it can be really stressful and overwhelming, to use that word again. But what are, some proactive strategies that you can recommend to excel both athletically and academically?
Yeah, I was actually going to break it down that way when you were just reading that question, because I do think it is a two-pronged process, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
academically and athletically. I do think when they come in academically with the understanding that they're going to have more quote unquote free time than they've ever had because they're in class so much less than they are at the high school level, but that it's the actual opposite, that you're not going to have that same amount of free time. Because I think they don't get it like at the onset of like, yeah, I was only in class today from 9 to 10 and 1 to 2:50 or whatever it is. So like I had all this other time. And like usually at the onset of that fall semester as a freshman, it's like I had time to get lunch and I had time to take a nap and I had time to do this. And like, well, that was actually the time you should have been like getting ahead on some things, right? And so I do think that the sooner that they realize that it's going to take work, right? It is not going to be maybe just the same way that they handled high school, and study for a test the night before. And that's just not the same times it works here at the college level. So I do think like when they really get organized and start to really increase that time management and their whole plan for the week, I do think it's really helpful. We run study halls here in the fall and the spring, and my assistant always meets with them on a weekly or biweekly basis, to do some academic check-ins. I do think obviously we help with that, but they're in the driver's seat, right? Once they get here, we're not going to class with them. So I do think when they understand that it's so important that they manage their time well, but also it's like not taking plays off, right? In basketball, like you can't take plays off, you can't take days off in school. That it's just like you procrastinate on stuff because you're going to drown. You've got to get ahead of it. Athletically, thing one I would say is that it becomes bigger, faster, stronger, and it happens overnight, right? That as soon as like you get to the college level, like all of a sudden it's faster, all of a sudden the people are stronger, all of a sudden they're bigger, right? Than then usually what you've been competing against at the high school level. Coming in the best shape of your life, is so important, because if you are worried about having to get in shape, it's going to be really hard for you to remember all the concepts and all the other things, because you're going to be constantly trying to play catch up about getting in shape and getting stronger. The other thing I would say, with that, and she's a sophomore now on our team, but she like summed it up for me perfectly last year, when she was just a freshman in the program, and just said, she's like, like I just have to keep reminding myself that I haven't been a freshman in 4 years. And it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
Because you go from like that senior experience of being a senior in the program to then like overnight you're right back to like not knowing anything. And like for them, they're only roughly 18. Again, I'm not great at math, but 4 years out of 18, that's like a decent chunk percentage wise, like of their life, right? That they felt like they knew a lot of things, and like here we go, like you start over again. I think the other thing that is sometimes kind of hard for them is like in high school, right? Rarely have I recruited a high school player that all 5 to 7 people that were in their high school rotation are all college players. They all know what they're doing. They're all ready to rarely, right? Usually it's them, maybe one other person that is thinking about playing in college. So like in practice, a lot of times it's like not their name that was coming out of their coach's mouth because he or she knew what person X was going to do, right? They was probably their best player. It was getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like to remember the plays, to know the offense, to know the defense, to do all of that kind of like skill development stuff. So like they probably didn't feel like they were getting critiqued a ton. Then you come to college and like the being the freshman again for the first time in 4 years mentality, it's like they feel like their name's coming out of my mouth over and over and over again when I'm like, it's just because you don't know what you're doing or where you're going. Like, like you're just not used to hearing your name on like a consistent basis because that might not have been what was happening last year in high school. So I think once they start to like get over that hump of like, I don't know anything, right? That's sometimes like how it feels to them is like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. And like they flip the switch a little bit where it's like, I'm struggling to learn things right now, but I know I'm going to figure it out. Like I think that's a big switch for them because the other way can just feel daunting, right? That it just feels like you're never going to overcome that. You're never going to figure it out. All of that kind of stuff. Whereas the other way of thinking about it, like I might be struggling right now with it, but I know I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, inverting triangles, flipping switches, we're doing all the things today. Yeah.
That's all it's about. So
Yeah.
my fiance is a school counselor. So I was going to say, I think a lot of this sometimes I bounce ideas off of her. And she gives me some of like the psychological wherewithal behind things, even just like flipping your mindset, positive self-talk. So it's very good for a coach to have somebody like that at home. Although sometimes I'm like, just let me vent. Just let me vent. I'm like, don't use your work words.
That's funny. So it sounds like, in terms of like coming in, it's just like being open-minded. And I did a, like a bonus episode with a bunch of Shenandoah graduates. And I asked them like, how would you tell an incoming first year? Like, what would your advice be to prepare? And they were like, you can't prepare. Like, there's nothing you can do to prepare. So then what we settled on was just the idea of like being open-minded and like being open to like being flexible and giving into the process. And that's kind of what it sounds like here is just like recognize that I'm going to be talking to you in a way that you're not used to on the court and just like give into that process and just like you're gonna get through it. Like everybody has gone through it. It's gonna happen.
Yep. Yeah. You don't know what you don't know until you know that you didn't know it.
Yeah.
And like I don't even know how I came up with that years ago. But it has stuck with me, and I tell it to them all. You don't know, right? Like you don't know you didn't know it until you know you didn't know it. And so I think that is such a big part is like being open-minded, and understanding that you're coming from knowing everything, and it's going to change.
And just be ready, and it's okay. But
exactly.
All right, so wrapping up, we're kind of at the end, but I want to ask a couple last questions that I ask all the guests who come on. So what book or podcast would you recommend for every incoming first year to read or listen to before their season begins, and why?
If I could give a book recommendation, and this would to be honestly any college athlete, I read The Messiah Method last year, and it's definitely a book geared towards coaching. But I had a few of our players read it too. I think from a leadership perspective, it's awesome. It's a book about Messiah men's and women's soccer programs, which are Division III. And so I think it really resonates really well with them. Because it's another, right, like Division III type program. This isn't Coach K telling you about all the things that they're doing at Duke with millions of dollars. It really resonates with them that it's something that they can see. And so it's really just about like their team values, team leadership styles, like the way that they run their practices. And again, they've obviously won national championships and done all of those kind of things. But we adopted a lot of them into our team agreements this year, and just we call ourselves a team of grace, that like we're gonna, like we're gonna be able to bend for each other, with obviously still holding each other to a really high standard. That like, yeah, today may just have been a really bad, practice for so and so, and we're gonna be there to pick her up. So I do think it's a great book to read during your college time in general, especially on a team. I think it gives a ton of like very tangible leadership specific things to do with your team. And I think even for a younger player, it'd be really good for them to start looking at themselves through that lens.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like I've heard of that book, but I don't know if I just made that up, so I'll have to check it
Hmm.
out. So what
Hmm.
is something about the recruiting process or transition to college that you believe that other coaches might disagree with?
Um, I think that other coaches might disagree with that. I am brutally honest with them in the recruiting process, and I think sometimes recruiting is synonymous with schmoozing, right? And that like you're obviously recruiting and you're like convincing them on like why they should come to your school. Yes, it's sales, right? Like at the foundation of it is I'm selling person why on like why they want to come to Randolph Macon, right? That part is true. There's another component to it that like I even knew when I got to being a head coach, like one, I didn't want to be somewhere that I didn't feel like I could sell, like I felt passionately about the experience. Um, but I do feel like sometimes maybe other coaches and you just lose sight of like the dollar investment that goes into this. Because it is again, like I said, it's I've done it 11 straight years in a row now. And you lose sight of like, for this family that's sitting on my couch, this is what they've talked about their whole lives is to send their daughter to college. And so like it's a big deal. It financially is a big investment, but we almost become numb to it in some ways because it's like it's what we do on a cyclical basis over and over and over and over again. So I just try to be brutally honest with them, and to just tell them exactly where I'm seeing them, at that point in time, and to not overpromise them things if I don't think that's going to match up with their experience because the end of the day, I mean, you may get to transfer. And so I'm not going to say you don't get to only do this once, but no matter what, even if you transfer, like you don't get that time back. So
Hmm.
I take that really seriously. And that I want them, like a lot of the players that aren't playing basketball anymore are still here at Randolph Macon somewhere, like I convinced them to choose this school and whether or not they've had injuries or they've found other things. Um, it makes me happy that they're still here and that they still chose Randolph Macon because that's where they wanted to be.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good point about like not getting time back because obviously the transfer portal is whatever it is, and I hope that student athletes don't go into college thinking, well, if I don't like it, I'll just transfer. Because I think there's so many things like you build relationships, not just on the court, but like in the community, on campus. And it's like that's your world and your life and your home. And then to just like pick up and leave is really hard because then you're going into somebody
Mm-hmm.
else's world and home. And there's so many other things more, dare I say, more important than basketball. So
I say the
yeah,
ball's going to stop bouncing.
yeah.
And it always does. It does. No
Hmm.
matter if you're a pro, right? Like even Caitlin Clark, one day the ball's going to stop bouncing.
Right.
And so I think like, especially at our level, it usually happens after college, right? There's not a lot that go on to play professionally in whatever capacity. So it's going to stop bouncing. And what does that look like, And I think even for us this year was really good perspective for my team and having 3 season-ending injuries.
Mm.
And I think it was just really good perspective for them. And we just kept saying like it's just not really about basketball. And I think finding your fit in the recruiting process is so much about that. It's just like if basketball was taken out of this equation, like is this still where I want to choose?
All right, and last but not least, any final words of wisdom? And if you've said it all, then you can just say, I've said it all.
I think I've said it all.
Okay. And if anybody wants to like keep up with Macon and just find out what's going on, maybe elite camp, stuff like that, where can they follow you
Mhm.
all?
Follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We do have a Facebook if people still use that.
Sorry,
Um,
it means laugh.
It's okay. But no, literally, our players were roasting me the other day because I said that I heard something on the radio and they're like, "You listen to the radio?" I'm like, "Well, one, I drive 25 miles here and back every day." And I was like, "So yeah, sometimes it's not always like I'm picking Spotify and whatever else." They were like, "We have a playlist that's 13 hours long."
Oh my
I was like,
gosh.
I'm so happy for you. Like, I'm like, yeah, sometimes I do listen to the radio. They're like, are you a boomer? I
Are you
was
a
like, shut up.
boomer? Yeah, share that playlist. 13 hours is a long time. But do you remember the handles? If not, I can just like add them.
I think they're all at RMCWBB.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, that's it. I appreciate you being here. Thank you again.
You are welcome.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're looking for more specific recruiting advice based on your situation, head over to hoopsthroughlife.com today to schedule your free 30-minute strategy session with me. We will discuss where you currently are in the recruiting process, where you want to go, and create a plan to get you there. Again, that's hoopsthroughlife.com, hoopsthroughlife.com. And if you have any questions for me or questions you want me to ask future guests, you can email me at l@hoopsthroughlife.com. That's el@hoopsthroughlife.com. I look forward to hearing from you soon.